Hey guys, John here, and welcome back to the Synthmaster 3 tutorial course. Today we're going to be taking a look at the LFO. Now, LFO stands for Low Frequency Oscillator, and it's a great source of modulation. Now, the shape of the wave we choose will continuously cycle, and we have lots of different options to customize it. So let's start from a fresh preset and add an LFO, and the way we do that is by clicking this gear icon, going to Add New, and then selecting LFO. Now, for this example, let's bring down our frequency to maybe around here, and then we're going to drag and drop, and now we have this mapped. So let's first talk about the controls down here at the bottom. The first one we have is speed. So this is going to control how fast or how slow the LFO is going to move. Now, all the way at the top, we have a max speed of 100 hertz, and down here at the bottom, we have the slowest. It can go at 0.01 hertz, and we can always double-click this to go back to its default at 1 hertz. Now, the next one we should talk about is volume, and an LFO is a waveform just like any other one, so we can also control the volume, which will result in less modulation, and all the way here at the bottom, the volume is 0, which means no modulation. So next up, we have noise, which is really interesting because we can impose noise on top of our LFO shapes. And even when the volume is all the way at the bottom, we basically just have noise, which is very interesting. So next up, we have phase. Now, this knob is going to determine where exactly in the waveform cycle that we want it to start from. Now, all the way here to the left and all the way here to the right is going to be essentially the same value. Now, if that's somewhat confusing, try to think of phase like a circle, which is 360 degrees. So it's always going to wrap around. Now, something interesting for here on the left-hand side, and maybe bring this up to somewhere around here, so it's basically starting going upwards, we can see the filter starting to open. Now, if we change it to the spot here where it's starting to descend, the filter starts closing. So it's very important where we place this phase knob, and it's also really cool to modulate as well. And we can also add a gate to our LFO as well. And if we start incorporating volume and noise and phase and the speed, it can get really interesting as well. Now, next up, we have SH, which is sample and hold, and here we can decrease the resolution of our LFO. Now, if we added this in combination with a little bit of noise, can also get some really interesting modulation as well. Now, the last knob we have here is called tone, which is actually very interesting because this will send our LFO's shape through a low pass filter. Now, on a sine wave, it's probably not that interesting, so we can select the display and maybe go to something like an AM and maybe this shape right over here, which is kind of interesting. So once we start low passing this, we can start to see how it rounds off these edges or it filters it. Now, this would also be a cool knob to modulate as well. So I've set my frequency knob here about the center, and my tempo right now is 120 because now we need to talk about sync. Now, similar to the envelopes, we can also sync our LFOs to our project's tempo, and for that, we first need to enable sync, and by default, this is going to be set to 4/1. However, let's do something a little bit faster, maybe like an eighth note, and for this example, I basically have just 4 bars here of a note being played, and let's take a listen. Maybe we can do something also like a quarter note, or even a half note. or even something fast like a 16th note. And we also have multipliers here. So by default, this is going to be on times 1. And for this, let's maybe bring this down to an 8th note, and we can go from times 1 to times 1.5. Or also we can go to divided by 3. Now this is pretty fast, so let's slow this down just a little bit here to maybe a quarter note. So depending on how we set this up with sync, we can really get some cool rhythms going along with our project's tempo. Now, earlier on in the course, we talked about unipolar and bipolar signals, and now that we're on LFOs, we should talk about this one more time. So by default, these LFOs come as a unipolar signal, meaning that they can only operate on the positive territory or only on the negative territory, but never both. Now we can see here, this is modulating the frequency, and this is going to be on the positive territory as it's only going to the right side of this notch here. And we can see that as well here in the amount. As we turn this here, we can modulate here on the positive side, or we can go here to the left and go onto the negative side. But no matter where we put this, is only going to be on one side, so on one pole, so unipolar. However, if we select bipolar, this is going to oscillate on both sides, so both poles, positive and negative. And then once again, unipolar, and then bipolar. So now it's time to talk about this trigger option here in depth. Now we talked about trigger when we discussed the envelopes, but now we need to dig a little bit deeper. So for this example, we're going to set our sawtooth wave to a sine wave. We're going to add an LFO just like we did earlier. And for this LFO, we're going to pick a triangle shape, something like this. And for modulation, we're not going to use the frequency, but we're going to use the pitch, as this is probably the best way to demonstrate this. So we can drag and drop this here, and then we reduce the modulation just by a little bit so it sounds something like this. Now for these next few examples, it's important to listen to what's happening, but it's also very important to see visually here in the spectrum view of what exactly is happening as well. So when I play a note, we can hear that the pitch is being oscillated, and we can see this triangle shape is moving the pitch, which is our triangle LFO. So now by default, we're going to be in this trigger mode called poly, meaning that every voice is going to get its own LFO. So if I play a note, it's going to start doing this. But once I play this and I hold this and I start adding another note, that's going to get its own LFO. So let's check that out. So as chaotic as that might sound, it's a very good example to see what exactly is happening, that every voice is getting its own modulation and its own LFO for that modulation. Because all of these LFOs are not in sync, they're kind of just going at their own speed, and it starts whenever I press the key. So the next mode we have here under trigger is called global. Now this will trigger the LFO to start running once our song starts. So for this example, we're first going to hit stop here. We have 4 bars of a note. Now once this is playing, the LFO is going to start, and I'm also going to play some additional notes, and notice how it doesn't do the same thing that it did with poly. It's going to stay on that same LFO. So here we go. So notice how it didn't re-trigger once we start hitting different notes. It only re-triggers once our project starts. So next up, we have a mode called random. Now, what this is going to do is pick a random spot in the LFO's phase to start triggering at. So anytime we hit a note, it's going to be at a random phase. And if we slow down the speed here, we can see this a little bit better. So not only can we see it here in the spectrum view, but if we look here at the display, we can see that it starts at a random spot every single time. And finally, the last mode here we have is called mono. Now with mono, the LFO will only restart its cycle if no notes were being held before a note is played. So if I play a note and I hold it and then play other notes at the same time, the LFO will not restart its cycle. I have to first let go of all the notes that I'm playing and then play a new note for the LFO to reset. So here's the first note, and if I play another note, it's just going to follow that path at the same time. But if I let go of the notes, and let go, and let go, it's going to start at the same spot. Now, again, if I hold one down, it's essentially going to follow the same shape the entire time. So from an init preset, let's talk about the envelope tabs that come inside every LFO, which is a really cool feature to have. So let's go to the gear icon, select add new, and then go to LFO. Now again, let's drag and drop this LFO to our pitch. Maybe let's bring this down something like that. And again, we're going to change this out to a sine wave. And we have something like this. So now let's click over here to the envelope tab and we have a few additional controls. Now the first one is going to be delay. Now every time I hit a note, the modulation begins instantly. Now if I want to delay this modulation for a certain amount of time, this is exactly what this knob will do. So if we bring this up to something like this maybe, we can see here this was the time it waited and then it starts to modulate. Now we can go a little bit further. And there we go. So that's the delay control. It's very useful in lots of different situations. So let's bring this down and let's talk about the attack time. So once you press a note, the modulation begins instantly, but also instant power. However, we can add some attack time. And you'll notice here it starts a little bit softer and then it kind of eases into where it should be. So let's increase this a little bit more. And a little bit more. So hopefully you can see what's happening here. It's slowly starting to build up to its full strength, which is actually really nice. This is kind of cool on vibratos or maybe stuff with a filter, something like that. And we also have the attack slope just like we had before. So we can change how quick or how slow this thing happens. Now, if we bring it to something maybe kind of like this here, it's going to be low for a while and then it's going to ramp up pretty quickly. So we can almost see that this curve here is essentially almost the same thing that's kind of happening here. And we have the same thing for the release phases as well. We do want to bring down our final level and maybe increase some release time. And then here, the same kind of thing applies. And we also have a slope as well. So for this to here, let's bring up our release on our amp, something pretty high up like that. And let's take a listen here. Let's bring our final level all the way down, maybe increase the release time, something kind of like that, and reduce our attack time and slope. And once I release the note, we can kind of see that it doesn't stop instantly. It kind of fades out a little bit here as well. We can increase the release and maybe do something kind of like that as well. And let go. So we can kind of see that how that happens here as well. So these are really, really cool features. Like I said, especially on vibrato or really anything that you can think of. It's a really cool way to tighten up and really customize our LFO however we want to. So now that we know how the controls of the LFO work, we might want to change out the different shapes or even see all the shapes that Synthmaster has to offer. Now to do that, we have to go back to our LFO tab and simply click this window here. On the left-hand side, we have our categories, and on the right-hand side, we have the waveforms inside that category. So right now we're in basic and we have stuff like triangles, square, sine, sawtooth, sawdown, so on and so forth. However, we can pick different categories and see all the different waveforms that come with that, and then we can just double click those to load those different shapes. Now, earlier on in the course, when we were talking about making a custom waveform here for the oscillator, we can do the same thing for the LFO, which is really cool. We just click the pencil icon and we have the waveform editor and we can start making our own shapes. So if you want to learn how to use this, check out the earlier videos where we talked about how all this editor works, and you can start making some really cool custom LFO shapes that way. And finally, let's talk about a really cool feature called crossfade. So again, we're on a fresh preset here. Let's go to our gear icon and go to add new LFO. Let's bring our frequency down to maybe something like that and drag and drop this here so we have some modulation. So here on the right-hand side, we have something called crossfade and we have a knob here. Now, at the moment, this isn't going to do anything because we're on single mode, which is a single LFO. So if we click this here and we go to double, our display is going to change a little bit. Now, the one here at the top is going to reflect when this knob is at the left, and then this one here at the bottom, this triangle, is going to reflect when this is all the way at the right. So if we change this to something crazy right over here, and this is going to be on the left-hand side, this is that waveform, and as we start crossfading, we can see this is going to start morphing into a triangle wave. So yet another really cool thing to make your modulation really, really interesting. The LFOs in Synthmaster are really flexible and there's quite a lot you can do with them, so make sure to spend some time and use all their cool features and make some really interesting modulation shapes. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you learned something and we'll see you in the next one.